The best player on every hero. A video series that has very easily been my most successful and the most requested since I started my Overwatch esports journey way back at the end of 2018. I've made like 7 of these up until this point, and they've all been way more successful than I ever could have imagined. But to be honest with you, when OWL ended, I thought this series was going away for good, just knowing the uncertainty of what was going to come next. But thankfully, OWCS had such a quick turnaround that we have the opportunity to do this at least one more time. Although there is a different thing going on with this one that makes it a bit more special compared to the others. This time, I'm having the community decide who was the best player on each hero. I ran a Google Forms and over 950 of you guys responded. You had to answer each question to be eligible, so I appreciate all of you who are that dedicated. I put fate in your hands this time, although some of you made it known you still wanted to hear my opinion, so I'll chime in from time to time, especially if I disagree or if there's something I feel strongly about, and I'll make sure to put up charts for when I think it's necessary for how skewed some of the results may look or how close they were, and if you want to see the full results for every hero, I'm going to leave a link in the description. Oh, and a huge shout out goes to OBS Sojourn. Literally, her POVs are the reason this video is possible. Please check out her YouTube and subscribe if you haven't already. She is the GOAT and one of the most absurdly dedicated people in the scene that you will ever meet. Without further ado though, let's jump right into things, this time starting with the supports for once, going from right to left. And that means we're starting off with Ana in the support role. And I wasn't necessarily surprised about who the community picked, that being Shu. It's more so how skewed the results ended up being. Shu really was dominant, but there are a lot of fielder advocates out there. So when I saw that Shu garnered over 70% of the votes, I was like, wow, he really did step up his game even more compared to previous years. He was by far none in most people's eyes the best flex support, and this includes his Ana. It was world class all year long. I'm in total agreement with the community. You really can't go with anyone other than Shu. His aggressive playmaking style worked so well on a Crazy Raccoon team that was so great in a dive setup, that liked the fast tempo, and they could usually rely on Shu to make that possible, as he would always go for those Hail Mary grenades, or even getting way closer than most other flex supports would, to set up the likes of Junbin and Lip to be as strong as they were in like that Tracer-Winston combination. He diffed literally everybody that came in his path. There is a very clear difference between him and everybody else below. A result that's a bit less skewed though is with Baptiste. The community as well as myself both went with Landon, although Shu did garner over 30% of the votes, so this was definitely not a cakewalk by any means. It's clear though that a lot of people in this community know ball with the Landon pick. He played so much more BAP than a lot of other people in OWCS, which I think definitely helps, but it's also good when you're generally freaking nasty on him, like Landon. He just has everything figured out. He's been elite the last 3 seasons, but he really transcended space and time this year, just keeping Hottie alive like nobody's business, creating big plays, looking like a robot at times with that shoot heal, heal shoot type of thing, the perfect rhythm, really smart. It seemed like he did a great job of leading the team, placing the windows to help win fights or set them up to win fights. He was really strong with making his own plays, but also making sure his teammates were in the best position to succeed. Landon was critical for SSG's success this season. They were one of the best rush teams, and a lot of it comes with how he was able to command this team and make them be in the right place at the right time always. I love how Landon played on BAP, and this is well deserved. Next is Brigitte, where we're going to have the first disagreements of the video between me and the community. The community went with Chorong, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that pick at all. It's a very good argument that you can make for this type of guy. With how strong he looked in dive, that Ana Brig setup, it was the bread and butter of Crazy Raccoon for most of this year, and a lot of main supports kind of fed their brains out this year. Chorong, I felt, did it a lot less than some of the others, and that certainly helps with this case. Chorong usually could keep the bad words out of people's mouths with how he played. Very consistent overall, can't go wrong with him. But in my opinion, I think the best Brig was Fielder. It may seem a little crazy just because Chorong played vastly more Brig, but just off of the eye test, the impact, and playing her in like the most Brig-centric meta, Fielder just seemed to check off more of the boxes to me. He looked so good in that final push for Falcons to become the eventual champions, and with how he played in the Asia finals as well. It was just crazy. He made plays out of thin air on this character, showing that when he played her on Dallas in the Junkerqueen meta, that it certainly was not a fluke. This guy knows what he's doing on Brig. It seems absurd to me just because, Fielder has a habit of hanging back and being a bit more passive compared to other supports, but it never really felt like that on Brig. It was like a completely different player, still a bit of a calculated nature, but oftentimes winning fights that he really shouldn't have all by himself, or at least just setting up Falcons somehow. With the crazy clutch rallies, I loved what Fielder did on Brig. I don't think anyone was quite as dominant, and again, because it came in such an important Brig meta, I feel that he should end up getting the award here, although I do understand the argument for Chorong. You can make a really good one for him. For Illari, for once, it's not going to be Symmetra. We get to change it up a bit. This time, we're going with Violet, and I agree wholeheartedly with the community here. He was able to get over 42% of the votes, and I think that's about right. No one really played Illari as much as Zeta Division did this season. It was a style that was very unique to them, and oftentimes it worked very well, able to basically punch above their weight and be even with teams like Falcons and Crazy Raccoon. And then in other instances, Violet could just be dominant on this hero against the teams that were a bit lower than Zeta Division. It was a very unique playstyle to this team, and it's easy to see why. Violet is one of the only guys in the world that can pull it off. With his playmaking, with his mechanics, he was nice with it on Illari. Now, I know there's a lot of things that he did wrong this season on a bunch of different heroes, Illari included, but if you look past a couple of really weird blunders or just freakish plays, there was a lot of good that he did on this hero this season, and I don't think anyone else even compares, although I do want to give a good shout out to somebody like Cal or Chorong. They also played well, but Violet definitely takes the cake here. He was the biggest advocate for this hero, and he made her work. Now, for the first time ever in this series, we get to talk about Juno, and this one wasn't even close, with over 65% of the community votes going for Chio. Not that I disagree, but a pretty crazy number nonetheless. Now, I think the thing with Chio is just the fact that he was on the most successful team in this meta. If you look at the Asia playoffs as well as the grand finals in DreamHack Sweden, he was just the best. He played on the top Juno team. They were the most dominant. And, to be honest with you, I felt that a lot of people in that Brig Juno setup didn't exactly play them right. There's a lot of overlapping ults or pressing ults at the wrong time, just victims of really stupid mistakes, but Chio did a bit less of them than everybody else, and he was able to hold his own, make some really smart decisions, and that's part of why Falcons were able to be so successful. Now, if Falcons didn't win the championship, maybe things would be different. Maybe he's just benefiting from this team ending up winning it all and everything, but ultimately, Chio felt like the best Juno based off of what we know. That character can be kind of brain dead, but I think Chio's a pretty suitable answer. As for Kiriko, the answers were pretty diverse. Violet ended up winning it out, and that's who I'd pick as well, but Shu got a lot of votes, Fielder, RuPaul gets thrown in there as an honorable mention, and Ultraviolet was one person that got a lot of praise, Landon as well. A bunch of good Kiriko players this year for sure, but I liked Violet the most as well as the community, and I think it's for one simple reason. Just like with Illari, it was a comp that it felt the rest of the league didn't run as much compared to Zeta. They loved their Kiriko. They kind of let Violet do his own thing a lot of the time. And again, it did lead to a lot of blunders, a lot of weird decisions. He'd go on some crazy flanks, but a lot of the time that risk was paying off. It's because of that unorthodox playstyle, doing some of the most dumb flanks imaginable, that he was able to open up plays for his team with those random headshots. Even if the risk didn't always pay off, it felt like it was worth it, especially in those uphill battles or situations where things were looking dire for his team. He was a good individual playmaker on her. I liked what I saw. I like aggressive Kiriko players, and Violet certainly fit the bill, even if he didn't always play the most perfectly. Next up, we're going on to Lifeweaver, and unsurprisingly, the winner is Rack Attack. You can rest easy, Mr. Zetas. You don't have to turn against the world. They did the right thing. You can chill, my guy. Now, it's at least worth shouting out some of the other people who even gave him a try, like Chorong, Chio, and some of the folks over in OWCS Japan, but this is Rack's hero, man. He deserves this one. Some people may say bias, but come on, man. He was one of the only people to play him at least somewhat consistently this year, a defense strat, especially on Midtown. It worked well for NRG. They were actually able to show some results on this hero, and that's saying something because for the most part, he is absolute garbage. I mean, he was good with the movement, man. He was smooth with it. Used those pedal platforms well, cooldowns were good, the trees were able to save lives surprisingly, and every once in a while, we'd see them do some full holds against some weaker teams that gave them some trouble. Hell, he even broke it out against some of the more relevant teams and found at least some success in those fights, and I think that is more than enough to give him the title of Best Lifeweaver because, I mean, who the hell else was doing that? Now for a timeless classic, Lucio time, baby. And 54% of the voters went with Chorong, and I think that's about right. I agree completely. I thought he was most certainly the best Lucio if you look at all of the regions. I felt like there was a lot of bad Lucio play this season, and he was like the lesser of all of the evils, if that's what you want to say. There was a lot of Ajaxes, even from some of the top main support players in the league. Just some weird decision making from the likes of Chio and Violet, and you know, while I like Rack Attack and Vega, maybe not quite as strong or consistent as Chorong. There were some Lucio-centric metas early on, and Crazy Raccoon were really dominant in them. He didn't make all that many mistakes. I felt like he could get away with his aggression no problem, make some good plays, not feed his brains out, and I'd say just knowing how generally Lucio play went this season, that should be more than enough to give him this title. Then let's just get this over with. Next is Mercy. Nobody really cares. Zero skill hero. Nobody really played her anyway. I struggled to even think of players to put on the ballot, but then I remembered funny Astro, and that one time he played her on Kings Road defense and made it work surprisingly, so I put him on there, and it seemed that either everybody agreed with me or nobody could think of another really good answer, so we ended up getting the most skewed result of the entire poll here, with almost 90% of the voters going for Funny Astro on Mercy, and it's all because of literally one time of him playing it. Nobody played her, really stupid hero, she sucks, that's all there is to it. Congrats Funny Astro, let's move on. And then we have Moira, another boring hero. Fielder ended up winning this out by a pretty large margin at 52%, and I'd say it's fair, that's who I'd pick too. And it's mostly because, you know, Fielder's always been goated on this hero. Not that it means much because it's Moira, but he's always been the teammate enabler on this hero. Always has been, always will be. Higher healing output than everybody else combined out there. And he made a couple of plays here and there, I guess. So we'll give it to Fielder. Not that much Moira played this year, but when she was played, Falcon seemed pretty good on her. And last but certainly not least is Zen on the support role, and this was one of the most diverse votings that we had in the entire video, with 5 different people getting at least 9.3% of the votes. The winner was ultimately simple, Flex support of Poker Face, and that's who I picked as well. Zen unfortunately wasn't all that relevant this year, but somebody who tried his best to make that not the case was Simple, especially when Poker Face brought out that super chaotic ball composition that made them be one of the best teams in Korea in the latter half of the year. We saw some good success, even pushing some of the top teams to the limit, pushing some of the top Flex supports to their limits with some of the playmaking he was creating, with the damage output, with the picks he was getting successfully despite not having a lot of peel. It was great. It was a breath of fresh air, and he was one of the only guys on the year that seemed to make Zen work well, especially in like a non-bunker setup. This guy was on his own a lot of the time, and I'm impressed with how much he held his own like on a consistent basis. Simple was absolutely goated on Zen, and I respect what he did very much. On to Ashe and the DPS, and this goes to Quartz without question. I don't know how you could even argue for another player on this character, especially with how he played in the latter half of the year, specifically Stage 4 EMEA and in the playoffs. He carried like nobody's business on this hero. It genuinely might have been the highest peak on Ashe I have ever witnessed by a pro player. He was that good. He was the carry of the playoffs. He might have been the most clutch player. I would argue he was, based off of some of the plays he was making on this hero. He won so many fights out of thin air. He carried this team to relevance time after time. They were way more competitive in the playoffs than they should have been because of him and his efforts. Quartz was absolutely amazing on Ashe, and nobody else compares, plain and simple. Onto a lot less important hero in Bastion, and honestly, you could either go with Kai or Seeker, one of the two. I personally went with Seeker, and that's who most of the audience went with as well. Maybe it's some recency bias going there, because Kai did make it work for ends during like the early section of the season when they played the Sigma comp. But I found the Seeker Bastion to be a bit more enjoyable in that freaky Rein comp that Nightmare liked to break out in stage 3 and 4. It was really enjoyable, it found a decent bit of success, and, you know, that's really all there is to say about Bastion. I thought he did a pretty decent job just knowing how hard it is to make that comp work. Next up is Cassidy, and the winner for this one ended up being Lip, and while that's not something that's totally surprising, I thought it was interesting that the voting was very one-sided here, with Lip getting over 60% of the votes. There were some quality cast players this year, thinking about Quartz, Proper, Stalker, Merit, Sparker, but Lip truly was that insane on the hero that people didn't even think it was a contest, and I can't blame them. Lip's cast at times felt otherworldly. You think about some of the early portions of the season and the final push in the Asia playoffs as well. It was play after play with this guy. It's kind of scary how accurate he is on this hero. The flicks were nasty, so many headshots. He was part of the reason that Crazy Raccoon were in some of those intense matches against Falcons, even though they'd come up on the short end of the stick in the end. He was the main reason, it felt like at times. Just being set up, pocketing him, letting him go to town through the Juno ult, just hitting every single shot imaginable. Lip was absolutely cracked on this hero, and I can't think of a better candidate. Then there's Echo, and it was basically a two-player race here. It was Stalker and Heesang, but Stalker ended up winning out with over 50% of the votes. And genuinely, I don't think you can go against him in this scenario just because of that final push in the playoffs. Stalker was so good on Echo for Team Falcons in the playoffs. He literally won a finals MVP on her, and a lot of the time, you can't really argue with something like that. But just looking beyond that, beyond the accolades, how he did with the gameplay, in the playoffs in the most important Echo meta, he diffed everyone. I mean, hard diffed. Even Heesang didn't stand much of a chance. He was blitzing other Echoes like nobody's business. The duplicates were always on point, seemingly. Super clutch, whether it be going to a Brig and getting Rally, staying alive as Mauga, getting value as an extra Reaper. He always seemed to do the right thing. Stalker really wanted to win a championship. He showed up big time on Echo, and I'm a big time appreciator of his performances. Next up is Genji, and while there are some pretty great Genji players from the first season of OWCS, this just has to go to Proper, and the voters agreed with over 65% of you going with Proper. I've seen the argument that Heesang played him better for a longer period of time, and some people even appreciated Sugar-Free and Kevster, but Proper's peak on this hero was just something that's hard to ignore, you know? How he played in the Asia playoffs was one of the highest peaks I've ever seen on this character. It rivaled some of the all-time greats. We're talking Who Are You and Sparkle levels of crazy. To have those out-of-body experiences in some of the most important games of the season is just a thing of beauty, to be that clutch. It's just a similar thing to Quartz, I almost feel like, you know, where he was undeniably the most clutch Ashe. But in this situation, Proper is very easily the most clutch Genji. Again, you could argue other people maybe were more consistent on the air, but when it mattered, when it comes to the highest peak and having the most noteworthy performances, Proper takes it in a landslide. As for the more irrelevant, if you want to call it, Shimada Bro, Hanzo, this one you could really go with anybody. Nobody played this hero on the year. I threw up guys like Stalker, Kevster, Vision, and Proper as well. Just anybody who I could think of. Sparker as well. We ended up going with Stalker for this one because of that time he played it on defense on, what was the map? Circuit Royale. He broke it out for like a fight or two, found some kind of success, a couple of kills, farmed up a dragon. I'd say that's more than enough considering the amount of playtime we saw on Hanzo was very minimal. So we'll leave it at that and we'll move on to Junkrat. And believe it or not, I'd say he was more relevant than Hanzo, and it's all because of two specific individual Junkrat one-tricks out of Sweden, that being Gurkmeister and Kaya. Now, the community did the base thing, and they went with Gurkmeister. That's who I picked as well. It's no offense to Kaya. He was the OG, had like the crazy 5-man tire or whatever. But when I watched Gurk, I almost felt like he got more out of the hero while staring down so many disadvantages. It's just the way that he was able to confuse teams with the randomness. it was something special. Even the likes of Ents at times were like, what the heck is this guy doing? He was really good with the ricochets. I don't know how he did it. And just finding these random kills out of nowhere, sniping widows across the map. Only him, man. Only him. Being able to be successful on a hero that faces so many disadvantages, that isn't supposed to be good, is something that deserves a lot of respect. Him and Kaya both deserve respect for bringing that level of play to OWCS and being at least mildly successful. But Gurk, I think, just did a bit more. He edges out Kaya. Really close, but yeah, I think we gotta tip our hats off for making this find any kind of success at all this year. Now we're moving on to May, and overwhelmingly, Backbone won this poll with over 62% of the votes going his way, and I can't blame anyone for feeling that way, because Backbone always puts on a masterclass on May. Doesn't matter the year, this is just his hero. He was a staple for SSG at times, in the rush compositions in Stage 2 and in Stage 4, it felt like his May put in a lot of work. He's always the best with those strategic wall placements and hitting the crazy headshots with the icicles. Nobody does it quite like Backbone does. Although I do want to give an honorable mention to Alpha Yi. I don't know if I'd pick him personally. I'd probably still lean towards Backbone as the best May. But Alpha Yi was pretty noticeable on May this year. He really stepped up his game on that hero, and at times really made a difference for Zeta Division in that late season push, especially on Circuit Royale. Whenever he broke out the May on that map, he made a lot of big time plays. So shout out to Alpha Yi, big time honorable mention, although I do think Backbone probably edges him out just a little bit, knowing the amount of highlights he has and having significantly more playtime. Next is Pharah, and we're going with Heesang for this one. Over 52% of the votes went his way, and I wholeheartedly agree that he was definitely the best Pharah on the year. Maybe a good argument could be made for Labda for his late season playoff push, but when you look at the season from start to finish, Heesang was rather dominant, even against some of the best flex DPS in the entire world. We're talking a diff against Proper, Stalker I think as well, Alpha Yi, some of the best flex DPS this game has to offer, and he was very clearly a better Pharah. It felt like when she was the most relevant in that region that he was having a good performance on like a day-to-day basis. You could always feel his presence in the game, and I am very impressed with his ability to be consistent on that hero, even when facing a lot of pressure. Looking into Reaper, this one was not even close, one of the most lopsided polls of the video. At 72%, this one goes to Proper, and I don't see how you could argue for anybody else within a reasonable doubt, just because in the most important Reaper meta, in the playoffs, on Falcons, the championship winning team, Proper was the best. Like, without a doubt, he was the most consistent, the most dominant, whatever you want to say. Nobody was better than Proper in this Reaper setup. The Falcons were just the best of the best in this meta on all of these heroes. Proper made a lot of huge plays. It's kind of funny to think that it took a Reaper meta for him to win a championship, but damn did he do a good job. Death Blossoms all over the place, lots of little 4 or 5 caves going on for him. He played great, and that's saying something because Stalker also had a very great playoff run. He was right there with him being super impactful, and if it weren't for Stalker playing out of his mind on Echo, Proper probably wins Finals MVP. So a shout out to him for playing well in the clutch, winning that championship, even if it came in a boring Reaper meta. Next up on the list, we've got Sojourn, and I was really tempted to argue a couple of solid Soj players. I think about Quartz in the early season, Proper, Merit was good, Tree as well, but you really can't go against Lip. After watching back the gameplay, the amount of highlights, how much playtime he has on this hero, the consistency, I don't know how you could go against him, man. Lip was a living highlight reel. He was the show when he got to break out Sojourn for Crazy Raccoon this year. I mean, every single time, bam, 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 it was a winner. Genuinely, he was even better than I remembered. I don't know if it's because I'm just an idiot and I'm not paying close enough attention, or if it's because the beginning of the season was a long time ago, but watching back that gameplay was enlightening, man. Lip, every single POV I watched of him on Soj, it was just crazy. It always felt like he was doing something with those overclocks, man. Lip is just a machine when it comes to these hit scan heroes, and it's so hard to go against him in any scenario, and Sojourn is just a prime example of it. Speaking of Lip and winning Hitscan awards, he's going to win the Best Soldier 76. Not that it matters, Soldier barely saw any playtime, only a couple of teams ran him, especially if you're looking outside like the Busan Sanctuary area where he was somewhat common. Not that much Soldier to go around, but Lip did break him out from time to time, and one of the most memorable moments was on Suravasa, where he was able to get a good handful of kills, which is a pretty good resume compared to any of the other Soldier games you're going to see out there, so I think we can just give this to Lip by default and move on to the next hero. And said hero is Sombra, and much to the delight of Sombra haters worldwide, she barely saw any playtime at all this year. That was until we got to the playoffs, where Tree was able to ultimately put his name into the mix and claim the title of Best Sombra because of that strategy in the playoffs with NRG, especially in that game against Ents, where it felt like Vestola couldn't do much of anything on Mauga. Anytime he tried to put Cage up, the EMP was ready for him. It was a thing of beauty to watch NRG execute that strategy, be a weird but different team that was hard to prepare for, and completely counter a comp that everybody else was playing for the most part. Outside of that game against Ents, not that much Sombra to go around, but he did play her a couple of other times here and there throughout the season, and it was usually pretty spot on with the consistency. The EMPs, don't have much to complain about with Tree Sombra. He definitely played her a lot more than anybody else, and because of the fact that he made it work and he was able to win a playoff game, I think it's more than fair to give him the title of Best Sombra on the year. Then with Best Symmetra, this poll actually kind of surprised me, with 4 different players getting at least 14% of the votes. Definitely not something I was expecting, but to be fair, we did see a good bit of Symmetra, not just from the likes of SSG, but from some of the Korean teams for that brief period of time when Mauga was everything that was being played all the time for like 1 week in the first stage of the season. But in the end, Backbone ended up winning this poll, and I think that's pretty fair. He's always been the Symmetra guy, and this year was no exception. As usual, the TP strats were good. He was an annoyance who was able to help the rush composition of SSG have some pretty smooth movement, and on top of it all, he definitely played her more than anybody else. Outside of the Mauga meta, he was still utilizing her and finding value, which is not something that a lot of other teams can say. You know, you think about Yubi and his success, but that was mostly just in stage 1. You think about how good Alpha Yi was, and Lip and those guys, again, only for a brief period of time. Backbone did it consistently for a longer period of time, and I find that more impressive, being able to get value out of her even when nobody else is really playing her, so I think Backbone wins this one for sure. But how about the GOAT Torb? This one went to Pelican with over 54% of you saying that it should be him, and definitely can't blame anybody in that regard, because he's always been the Torb god, and this year was no exception. In a similar light to what we saw on 2021 Atlanta back in the day, he broke out Torb on ping, the ping god himself, and he still made it work. He was an annoyance. He was a good way to help counter dives. There's this time on Samoa where it was giving Luminosity a big problem. He played well, just as he always has. One of the most consistent Torbs of all time for sure. But I've gotta disagree. To me, this one's gotta go to Stalker. He was a real pain in the neck on this hero, like just as this random strat from time to time in some pretty critical situations and still making it work. I think about that time on Suravasa against Crazy Raccoon, or how about him being a menace on Midtown defense against Yeti? I don't know, man, just to be somewhat successful against a top tier opponent and then do it against Yeti and stop them in their tracks and counter a dive composition that they completely rely on. I don't know how you could go with anybody else. Maybe that's just me, but I loved what Stalker did on Torb those couple of times where he played him, because it was just so random, but it somehow worked still, you know? We'll leave it at that though, and we'll move on to Tracer, and I'm actually really excited to talk about this one, because this year in particular, it didn't seem like there was any super absurdly dominant Tracers where one guy was outclassing the rest of the pack. We've seen a lot of historic Tracer seasons, but this definitely wasn't one of them. I wouldn't say that the quality of play went down tremendously. It was just that a lot of Tracers felt pretty evenly matched, and you can see that through the poll results. The winner in blue there was Stalker at 30.1%, but then you have Hisang getting 21% of the votes. Proper got 16, Sugar-Free got 12, Kevster got 12. A lot of different varying opinions on Tracer this season, and again, I think it's because there wasn't anybody that was super dominant. You can make a good argument for any of these guys. I think ultimately Stalker's probably the best choice, There's a lot of good players, honestly, but I'd say Stalker wins it just because of that consistency factor. He played a lot of Tracer on the season while proper focused on the hit scan and the flex DPS stuff at times, but you could usually depend on him. Stalker didn't have a lot of absurd, ridiculous pop-offs, but he always did something to make a difference for Falcons, win or loss. A good argument could be made he probably had the highest floor of any of the other Tracer players, not necessarily the highest ceiling, but he never really had a lot of terrible games on the hero either, and that's pretty important. So I'd say Stalker can win this one out. Again, you can make a lot of arguments for any of these players. This one's heavily up for debate, but I think Stalker's a pretty decent choice. And now, for the first time, we get to bring up Venture in this series, and this one was maybe the closest poll of all, with Heesang just barely beating out Stalker at 40% to 37.7. A 22 vote difference was all it took. Man, it's a really tough one to say. A lot of the flex DPS in Korea were pretty nasty on Venture, but I always thought Heesang did a really good job. If teams tried to hold Crazy Raccoon at the spawn door, he made sure that wasn't going to fly. He had a lot of clutches on this character as well. You think about some times on New Junk City, and even Circuit Royale as well. I always go back to the time in Dallas on OWCS when he had that ridiculous clutch against Team Falcons in the finals. Lots of pretty memorable moments overall for Heesang on this character. And the final DPS is Widowmaker. This one was probably the closest pull of all. We just mentioned Venture, but this one, even more of a slight margin. Lip wins it out over Quartz, 319 votes to 305. It doesn't get any closer than this, and it's understandable why this would be a debate, because Quartz at the end of the season put on some masterclass Widow performances. It is basically the reason they made the playoffs to begin with, especially in that game against Virtus Pro. You can make a great argument for Quartz, and I myself almost went with him, but in the end, I feel like you've got to go with Lip, just because there's a bit more of a sample size there. He did so much more, he was so much more dominant, and he did it against better players as well. Quartz couldn't get as much value on Widowmaker when it came to the playoffs, while Lip it still felt like could do his thing. Quartz, you could argue, had the best peak / the biggest carry of the year on this hero, but when you look beyond that, when you look at how many good games Lip had on Widow, it's pretty tough to go against him. He did it on various maps throughout the season, and let's be real, some of those shots he was hitting, some of those absurd flicks on enemy tracers, absolutely disgusting. Between the absurd mechanics, playtime, and the elevated competition while still getting the best of the enemy team, I'd say that Lip makes a good argument to be the best Widowmaker of 2024. Although again, if you think it's Quartz, I definitely will not argue with you because he makes a pretty good case as well. And finally, we have Tank, and at 45%, Hanbin ended up winning this out. There were a handful of pretty damn good D.Va players this year, whether we're talking about Bernard, KSA, or Vestola, but Hanbin probably had the most results on this hero out of anyone. He played her a good bit this season, and it felt like whenever he was in on D.Va rather than Smurf on Winston, that Falcons were a more consistent team, and they were more competitive overall. Hanbin is simply the model of consistency on D.Va. Very few bad games from this guy on the year. Honestly, the worst probably came in Esports World Cup, which doesn't even count towards this video. The old man still has something left to prove, I'll tell ya. It's been so many years, but you can still always count on Hanbin's D.Va. No matter the era, no matter the team, he's going to give you 100% and look like one of the best players in the lobby. It's not to say that the other D.Vas weren't great, but I do think he played this hero a bit more than them, especially when you think about KSA or Vestola, mostly came in the latter half of the year, whereas Hanbin got to play a good bit of D.Va throughout the year while still showing that consistency. Next is Doomfist, and initially I was pretty set on going with like Bernard or maybe Junbin, but then I saw that over 50% of you guys went for Donghack, and I said, okay, maybe I need to rewatch some of these Yeti games where they're going crazy on the dive, and sure enough, I was convinced pretty easily with some of the stuff I was seeing with this guy. Donghack's Doom was absolutely cracked, and unlike some of these other teams, he kind of stuck with it after that first week. It was a very important part of Yeti's identity to stick with that dive comp, and despite a lot of teams turning away from it, Donghack was still able to find success, find some big kills, some carry potential. We saw what happened when he was pitted up against the top teams of Korea during that seeding decider. He more than held his own. He was always a great Doomfist. Donghak was genuinely the guy that was in charge. He set the tempo, and a lot of the time he made Yeti have this blazing fast pace that no one else could keep up with. He set up his teammates so well with some big time punches. Him and Viper were going absolutely crazy in like that Tracer / Genji Doomfist setup. He was nasty all year. And again, just the fact that he stuck with it, and he was still so good on him anyway, even when everybody said Doom sucks now, is really impressive, and a testament to just how much value he can get on a hero like this. Donghak was elite on Doomfist, and I'll gladly give him the nod. Next up is Junkerqueen. Realistically, there's only a few options here. Hanbin unsurprisingly won it in overwhelming fashion at 70%. I mean, this guy's been the king of this hero ever since she was released, essentially, and that's still held to be true on Falcons. There are a lot of moments, especially, I don't know, on Flashpoint, I'd say, in particular, they'd break out Hanbin on Queen, and it was pretty lethal. We saw him be successful with her in the playoffs. It was just always a treat to watch Hanbin play Queen. Definitely one of the strong points of a sometimes struggling tank line for Team Falcons, especially if you look at like the beginning or halfway mark of the season. He was great. Never any terrible games on her. If he could make her work, if it seemed like something that was a viable strategy, you best believe he's going to find some big time value. Now, you could also argue somebody like Kellen for how he did in the playoffs, or Belos Rhea. He did pretty well on Poker Face on Queen, but Hanbin, there's always a clear difference. I don't know what it is, but the way that guy plays Queen, it's just a league above everybody else, and that still holds to be true, even post-Overwatch League. And now for the first time, we're going on to Mauga. Not much to say here. Very sleeper hero. Nobody likes watching this guy in competitive play. And Hanbin, once again, gets to be the best player on a tank. He's already up to 3 in this video. Congrats to him. He was probably the most consistent Mauga of the bunch. Falcons were extremely deadly in the Mauga setup all season. I mean, Crazy Raccoon basically had to switch up their strategy and avoid the Mauga mirror match during Dallas just to have a chance. And we saw it happen in the playoffs when that couldn't be the case anymore. Hanbin straight up diffed everybody. I even thought he was a bit better than Smurf as well. And you know, I feel like this argument's been being made by the community since he literally first got introduced into the game. The first few weeks of Mauga, Hanbin was still dominant, and that has just raged on throughout the entire time that he's been any kind of relevant in the meta. It felt like he was always a bit smarter than the rest of the Maugas out there, and a slightly better playmaker. Not that it matters that much, this character is absurdly brain dead, nobody really cares that much, but I'd say just knowing Falcon's success in this setup, I think Hanbin's a pretty safe answer. Maybe you want to go with Smurf here too, but I like Hanbin slightly more personally, and clearly you guys agree. Next is Orisa, and I was genuinely a little worried that everybody would not be based with their voting, but I stood corrected. 39.4% of you went with Bernard as the best Orisa, and I'm so glad because I always thought he was just a bit more special than the rest of the pack. Again, not much to say because it is Orisa. She's boring, but Bernard made some pretty good plays on her throughout the entirety of this season. Despite being the third wheel, so to speak, on Zeta, the third best team in Korea, it always seemed like he was rising up to the occasion in the Orisa meta and doing more than the likes of these other top tanks like Junbin, Hanbin, Smurf. Doesn't really matter who. I always felt like Bernard did slightly more on the Orisa. He set up his teammates a bit more, and he was a bit stronger of a playmaker overall. Bernard was pretty goated on the horse, man. It was a good, stable presence for Zeta all season, and I think it's part of the reason why they were able to maintain their consistency and be one of the most dominant teams in Korea. With all of that Orisa-heavy gameplay that we saw, he certainly stood out as one of the best. As for Ramattra, it was another one that was pretty split. As you can see, a lot of people voted for some different players out there. Hanbin won this out at 29%, which is a very respectable pick to have. Hanbin, especially in the late season push for Falcons, broke out the Ramattra quite a bit, and he had some pretty nasty games on him, like more than I remember after going back and watching the POVs. This guy's pretty cracked. It might have been his best year on Ramattra yet. I kid you not, it seemed like he could get away with doing literally anything he wanted to. Super aggressive, good with the use of the blocks as well, and if anybody tried to match him in the mirror, it usually didn't feel all that close. However, I'm going to ever so slightly disagree. I think the best Ramattra on the year was KSA. I thought he had the best peak. Maybe you could argue Hanbin just had more playtime, so he's more suitable. But to me, The most pivotal moment of the season with any kind of Ramattra gameplay came in that EMEA finals in Stage 1 between Twisted Minds and ENCE. Twisted Minds just the day before had lost to ENCE, things weren't looking good for them in the Mauga mirror, so they decided to switch things up and bring up a KSA Ramattra strat, and it worked so good. I mean, so good to the point where they started off with a 3-0 lead in that series. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but things like this just mean a little bit more. The fact that they broke out this unorthodox strat after getting their butts handed to them the day before, and to see their opponents be so bewildered and confused, and to go out there and watch KSA put in so much work, that to me was a really special MVP-like performance on the hero, and we even saw him do pretty good on him for a little bit in like the early portion of Stage 4, before they inevitably went back to Orisa hell. It really depends on the person, but for me personally, that puts him over the edge over somebody like Hanbin. For Reinhardt, unsurprisingly, we're going with Hottie at 62% of the votes. I mean, he's just the Rein guy. He has been for 3 straight years now, and this was definitely the case again here in the first ever season of OWCS. Him and SSG like to break out the Rein from time to time, maybe not as much as the London Spitfire days, but we'd see them throw it out there, especially on like some control maps, and it had a decent bit of success, I'd say. Hottie could still do his thing and go crazy, swinging on the backline, doing those random charges that you're not expecting, getting the fat shatters, still a somewhat crucial part of SSG's identity, even if they were shying away from the Rein a bit more compared to previous seasons. Although I do want to give a shout out to some other Reins. I think Hottie just was the best of the bunch with how much he played him, and because he's the Rein guy, but Donghack had a pretty fun Rein, Infected was pretty good, LH Cloudy, of course, and even Junbin as well. Now for my go. Hog, baby. I freaking love Roadhog. Woohoo! At 70%, this one goes to Junbin. No shocker there. I know it's mostly just because of one set of plays on a specific portion of a map, but Junbin did that in like an MVP type of performance in one of the most meaningful matches of the season. I mean, it doesn't get more high stakes than a championship in Dallas with real prize money on the line against your rivals and Falcons, and you break out Hog randomly on Oasis City Center, and you just dominate, landing hook after hook, somehow finding value on this character that nobody else would dare to play. It was sick to watch Junbin do that just because absolutely nobody was expecting it. They practiced that clearly and it worked to perfection. And ultimately, the cherry on top is, again, the amount of pressure and what was on the line in such a relevant game like that. That just pushes him above anybody else that you could possibly mention. Although an honorable mention definitely goes to Nozel, the OWCS Japan named Kuji Brothers player from Stage 1. Their Lifeweaver Hog strat was sick, and he deserves some love. Shout out to him, but I think Junbin, knowing the level of competition, kind of edges him out here, sadly. As for Sigma, this was another one where there were some varying results. You guys, at almost 30%, went with Vestola, but notably, someone, Max, Infected, Hanbin, Bernard, and KSA got some good votes as well. I think that Vestola is a pretty respectable pick in this scenario, just knowing that it was a pretty crucial part of ENCE's identity, especially in like the first half of the year, where they broke out that Sig comp quite a bit in the bunker with Kai on Bastion, or just generally him being a very stable presence on defense. He was definitely the best Sigma in EU without question. Nobody was doing it like him. Picked up exactly where he left off from the World Cup. It's like nothing ever changed. This guy was still as dominant as ever, and he deserves a lot of respect, although he is not my personal best Sigma on the year. I'm actually going with someone. While I would have liked to see him play a bit more Sigma on an international stage, I feel like he did so much for Toronto Defiant in that Sigma setup. Even if it felt kind of weird to use him in certain scenarios, you could count on someone to have a high impact on the game. In fact, he was probably the most carry-oriented Sigma I saw on the year. So many times where it seemed like Toronto had no business winning a fight, just for him to go out there and kill everything himself, even if it came at the cost of his own life. It happened more times than I can count, where he would just win games on his own, where it felt like Toronto weren't playing that well, they were getting booned for no reason, they were being mid-fiant, but someone would refuse to lose the game in a critical scenario. When I think back to times where I'd say, wow, this guy's really making a difference, he is really carrying on Sigma, someone popped up the most. He has the most number of times under his belt for sure. He stands out the most, and that's because of the way he played the hero, a lot more aggressively than most of the other Sigmas in all of OWCS, all while on a less stacked team as well, where he needed to make the plays himself. He just is a bit more of an eye-catcher to me, which is why I'm going with him as the best SIG. Let's move on to Winston, and this one went to Junbin, and I totally agree with chat on this one. You really can't go with anybody else. I can understand the argument for Smurf maybe, but Junbin from start to finish was always either like the first or second best Winston without question. He was always nasty. A lot of moments it seemed like Crazy Raccoon were unstoppable in the Winston setup. They outpaced everyone imaginable. There was just no chance for you when they were in a groove, when they could do their thing. Shu throwing the nades as Zana, setting up success for Junbin, and then him going in and doing the rest with his superior mechanics. Junbin was arguably the best tank player in all of OWCS this year, and Winston was basically his bread and butter. Outside of a few times with Falcons playing up to their full potential, most of the time, it almost felt futile to match Junbin and Crazy Raccoon in the Winston setup because you knew you weren't going to do as much as this guy. Maybe it's because of the support he was getting, maybe it's because of the crazy mechanics. You can decide, but he was going nuts all season long, creating space, having those carries with the Primal Rage mechanics. Junbin did everything right on this hero, and he had one of the better peaks that we've seen in a little bit. But honestly, this has nothing on his Wrecking Ball, who he's also going to be the best player on. And genuinely, there's really no other option. I'd be disappointed if the poll wasn't as lopsided as 85% going in Junbin's favor. This guy was a menace on ball, and nobody could break him out quite as often as Crazy Raccoon and still find such crazy success. You know, your Belos Rias and your Infecteds and even your Dong Hacks of the world did have their moments, but Junbin did this on a consistent basis, and nobody could really play ball on a consistent basis. Only Crazy Raccoon could get away with that because Junbin was such an annoyance on him. So much attention always seemed to gravitate towards him, and you can't afford to have that distraction knowing the playmakers that are on Crazy Raccoon. Junbin did his job so perfectly. There was a great balance to his approach. He was a menace, really annoying people, but then at other moments, he'd just take over the game himself. No matter how intense a series was, no matter how close it was, no matter how risky it could feel to play the ball in that situation, he'd do it anyway because of the confidence he has in himself in this hero, and it almost always worked in Crazy Raccoon's favor. These guys were absolutely insane in the ball setup. It might have been their best composition of all in the entire year, and again, a lot of that has to do with Junbin and his general understanding of this hero. This guy is a freak of nature on ball, and it's really no contest. There is a very clear tier above when it comes to him versus the rest. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Zarya. You guys ultimately went with Hanbin, which is understandable, considering, again, this is one of his best heroes very easily. The model of consistency, always reliable no matter what the era. I couldn't find that much gameplay for Hanbin, unfortunately, but he was still pretty good from what I could see. There's really no issue with how he plays. He has a great understanding of this character. I love the way he bubbles. It's always been great. This dude always seems to have high energy. It's just that Falcons and him didn't get to play her all that much. As for me though, I'm going with someone on this Zarya. I'm with the 33% on this one. I thought he maybe did just a little bit more, and he actually got to play her a decent amount, unlike the people in Korea who essentially just played her for 1 week and then abandoned her. Someone got a little bit of playtime here and there throughout the year, and it usually went fairly well for him no matter what the timing was, no matter what the enemy composition was. There was some good success early on in Stage 1 as he was showing off his deep hero pool, and then recently in the playoffs we saw his Zarya absolutely ruin the NRG composition that they worked so hard for with the Junkerqueen. They were not ready for that Zarya. They could not find a counter in time at all. Kind of like with Tree and Sombra, as I said earlier, someone on this one character was able to completely destroy a team and what they thought could work for them. And that to me kind of puts him a step above some of these other Zaryas who are mostly just doing it in like that rock, paper, scissors that didn't get that much playtime on her overall. I thought someone, because of this meaningful game and a little bit more impact and playtime, is the reasonable pick to have here. And on that note, we're done. We did it. We've gotten through another best player on every hero video. I can't believe that we're able to still do this after all this time. I thought for sure I'd never do one of these again after Owl ended, but because of you guys and your amazing support, we're back here yet again, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. And if you enjoyed the video, definitely give it a like and share it with any of your friends who might be interested. But don't go anywhere, guys, because we're not done. I just wanted to get the thank you out of the way. Now we're going to move into some bloopers. This part is going to be absolutely silly. I have compiled some of my favorite custom other answers from this poll that just sound ridiculous or I want to make fun of. There's a good combo of them. I hope you guys enjoy. The first anonymous answer comes on the Lifeweaver poll, and this person simply says, I have no clue how to tell if a Weaver is good. Honestly, me and you both, but I don't think you have to worry, man. Like, you can say whoever you want. It's not going to skew the results because everyone's going to pick Rack Attack. I just thought this was silly though, because how do you even do that? How do you actually tell if someone's good on Lifeweaver when nobody plays him? Then for one of the responses on Best Mercy, we had 2 people say ATP Overwatch. You hear that, guys? I'm the best Mercy in OWCS. I'll take it. But then also another Mercy response. This one's probably my favorite of the day. We have somebody who said Tomathan, and in parentheses, he sells Mercy Kitten Pocket for 12 Canadian dollars. I have so many questions. 1, why? 2, why? And 3, why is it that you said 12 Canadian dollars? Like, do you have experience with this? Do you know someone else who had this experience? I feel bad for Tomathan here. Honestly, if you're out there, if you're watching this video, Tomathan, let us know down in the comment section if this is true or not. I want to see if you'll stand for this slander. And for another response, we just have a person who I'm pretty certain linked their own Liquipedia, Pizza Lover, based. Then another one of my favorites. This one actually came up quite a bit by the same person saying, didn't know, didn't want to skew the vote. Honestly, I can respect the integrity a lot. But my friend, for a lot of these, it's really not going to matter. You could have voted for whoever you wanted to, and it literally would not have changed the results. It's kind of funny to me that some people took it that seriously, but I also do appreciate it. And how about this response for Zen? Chorong at Esports World Cup, which doesn't even count for this video. Fielder is not him on Zen. Please don't choose him. We have some Fielder hate propaganda in the chat, man. I just think that's funny. I mostly put Fielder down because he's one of the only people I remember playing Zen. I knew nobody was going to pick him anyway, but man, that is hilarious. Now for one of my favorites. I got a couple of these. I just think they're really snarky and stupid because, like, who really cares? But this person said, Alpha, this is just disrespectful you didn't put him here. How could you, ATP? I hate you. Dislike, unsubscribe. It's not that serious, bro. I promise. I'm sorry if I didn't put your favorite player there, but, like, man, disrespectful? It's just a poll. The other option's right there, my guy. Just put in other. Odds are, if I messed up that bad, a lot of people are going to vote there with you, but they did not. Then we have one of my personal favorites for Hanzo, where this guy said lip. I think he shot a sonic arrow out of spawn. Once. No glaze. I love that you have to put no glaze at the end there like it really matters. Nobody even played Hanzo anyway. Honestly, if you just said because he shot a sonic arrow, I'd say Bastion would probably just not even bat an eye. Just the fact that you put no glaze at the end though is really funny. Then this one comes from a special someone who doesn't like Sombra very much, as you can tell by their answer. You know exactly who you are. Now for the most based vote of the video, we have Mauga doesn't take skill, therefore no one can be the best. Honestly, I'm with you here. We should just get rid of best Mauga. Screw Hanbin winning it. Nobody's the best Mauga because that character's stupid and we all hate him. This is a based comment. This next one caught my eye. This guy said none of the players in OWCS have a good ball. And that kind of makes me scratch my head because does Junbin not count then for you? Are you like a prime Among fan? I don't really get the gist there. And lastly, the final funny answer I got that I had to share comes from Zarya. This person felt the need to say, I feel disgusted and betrayed by the Zarya plays this season and will therefore abstain from voting. I just think this is hilarious. Like, someone could get that offended over the gameplay. Like, not even me making a bad choice like with some of these other responses, but just straight up because you think the Zarya gameplay this year was that booty. That's absolutely hilarious. I choose to believe that whenever you see Zarya's in OWCS, that you just get really angry, like steam coming out of your ears, breathing heavily, and while you're remembering how bad that Zarya gameplay was, you're typing out this response. Hey, if you're out there watching this video and you're the person who put this response, let me know if that's true or not. That's it though. That concludes the funny answers. Thank you guys again for watching this video. It really means the world to me that you guys are still here after all these years. Love y'all so much, and I'll catch you in the next video. We've got lots to come. Peace.